The Philippines is still reeling from the elections fever, but as the dust settles, the new composition of the Senate now gets clearer. With the high-stakes midterm polls coming to a close, it opens a gateway to a new race, the 2028 presidential elections. We will be joined by UP Political Science Assistant Professor Sol Iglesias to talk about the implications of the newly concluded elections. It's a beautiful day, Prof. Sol. Good morning. Welcome to the show.
Hello, good morning. Nice to be on the show. Thank you, Anne.
Prof, this midterm election brought about a lot of surprises, a lot of unexpected twists and turns, defying surveys and what people are expecting to appear on the lists. How would you compare this midterm elections to other elections that we've had?
I mean, like you said, there were dramatic twists and turns. I suppose what we would also need to take into consideration is that this midterm election was really dominated by the rivalry between two very powerful factions, right? Of course, the president's faction, the Marcos Jr. faction versus the Duterte faction. They were erstwhile allies. But in the course of the last 18 months or so, Uniteam really started to collapse as an alliance. And the midterm elections was quite a reflection of this rivalry.
Prof, this elections as well, this is where we heard the voices of our Gen Zers. Did you see any particular trend in the voters' behavior and preference, and did you see anything change because of the Gen Z's voting?
Well, if we compare it to the 2022 elections, Gen Z was voting around like the same profile as the rest of the demographic makeup of the electorate. Very strong support for the Marcos Duterte ticket. So now, it's very difficult to think of a youth vote as a bloc. What I would have expected, we need to really see the breakdown of the results. But what I would expect to see is that they were also similarly split among the two main camps, the Alianza ng Bagong Pilipinas camp linked to President Marcos, and of course the sort of pro-Duterte camp linked to Sara Duterte and her father, former President Rodrigo Duterte.
I want to talk about a couple of what a lot of people consider to be surprise results. Obviously, the inclusion of Bam Aquino and Kiko Pangilinan in this group. A lot of people are attributing it to what they're saying, the Gen Z or the millennial vote, especially when you take a look at least the registered voters. But then, would that be simple enough to attribute to them, or possibly not, considering that other candidates that are aligned with them, or at least people would consider allies with them, were not even close to being in the Magic 12? Is it more of them being a consensus vote from both the Duterte and Marcos camps, or is it really just that youth vote consolidating around them? What would you venture as an analysis when it comes to their high finish in this particular race?
I mean, I think there's a lot to unpack with regard to this extremely unexpected result, right? And it's not just about Bam Aquino and Kiko Pangilinan. It's also the very strong finish of Akbayan
Yes.
as a party list. The last surveys showed them to, they were about under 1%, and now it's like very clearly more than 6% of voter share, which guarantees them at least one seat, and it's likely that they will have 3 seats in Congress. So let's start with this persistent question of the youth vote.
Mm-hmm.
So if we're just going by the fact that there is, a pretty large proportion of youth voters in this election, I would say that's not really convincing enough to explain the sudden surge. You know, there were youth respondents in all of these surveys, which had already started at least late last year, prior to the filing of candidacies, no? And so I don't think that alone explains it. Certainly, it could explain to some extent,
Yeah. Prof, sorry, I hate to
the
interrupt you,
portion
but
of
I
the-
just want to piggyback on a part there that you mentioned, which is that the surveys couldn't explain it. In fact, some of these survey providers or survey companies did mention that they will have to review their own methodologies to try and ensure a more accurate survey going forward. I remember looking back at the last presidential election, wherein the big hope of the Lenny supporters back in her presidential race was that the surveys were wrong because the on-the-ground presence was so strong and on social media was so strong, but it didn't turn out to be the case come the election time. Shift now to the midterm elections, all of a sudden, things have shifted. The surveys were not as entirely as accurate as they were typically were, or at least traditionally speaking, they were normally accurate. How big of a factor is that moving forward, especially looking forward to the next presidential election?
I mean, look, I was actually quite surprised at the stance of survey companies, for example, Pulse Asia, social weather stations, at least those big two, and there are others quite consistently showing more or less the same range of probable results, right? So, for them to come out to say they have to review their methodologies, I think that's a very polite answer to the question of how was it possible that there was such a sort of estimation of the performance of a few. So I think that there's of course a lot of space, a lot of room to improve our methods of trying to gauge public opinion. It's not just the Philippines, it's also elections in the US, right? Like Donald Trump's support among American voters is consistently underestimated across since 2016, since 2015, 2016. So, but ultimately, I mean, as an academic, as a political scientist, and as someone who has worked with these survey companies and institutes in my own research, I think that I think that there is still a lot of questions that we need to ask, and it won't take just the next couple of days or weeks. For academics like me, it can take years to really understand this sudden this unexpected bunch of results. So there are some possible indications of why this happening. I mean, barring like outright monkey business. So there's been talk of a pink surge, right? The politicians are coming out saying, oh, it was our strong campaign finish and that kind of thing. I mean, I think that's something expected to hear from politicians, right? So we need to dig a bit deeper. For me, probably the more likely explanation, as you started to allude to earlier, is that there may have been a pickup from the machineries of the two rival camps.
Yeah.
No?
Prof, sorry to interrupt, but I just want to just personally ask, would you say that the voters, let's talk about the voters' behavior, because like we said, the results were unexpected, to say the least. Would you say the voters' behavior would be personality-driven or issue-driven?
I think it's a little bit of both, right? Because even if a large question around these elections, probably more relevant at the local level, are bread and butter issues, right? People are suffering, the economy isn't doing well, the global security and economic situation, there's a lot of uncertainty. But apart from that, the personality and issue that has been looming over this midterm election, especially for the Senate races, has been the impeachment trial of Sara Duterte, right? So things came to a head after the arrest of Rodrigo Duterte and his the fact that he's now awaiting trial in The Hague by the International Criminal Court over really the egregious level of violence of his war on drugs, right? Up until that point, support for Duterte, for Mr. Duterte, for Sara Duterte, had been at a decline, right? They were faced with all sorts of sort of an undercutting of their bases of power, from the arrest of Apollo Kibuloy to
Yeah.
the congressional and Senate inquiries, the Quadcom hearings over the EJ case, the POGOs, and then of course the questions of corruption and the basis of the impeachment of Sara Duterte, questions, serious questions over corruption in the office of the vice president and and DepEd. And so that has been, probably to a large extent what has been looming in the minds of voters, right?
Okay.
So you see that boost. Even just before the arrest, there was a recovery of the pro Duterte candidates.
Yeah.
Prof. Saul, I wanted to put the spotlight on the Magic 12 senators. We're seeing some sort of a balance here. We have 5 from PDP Laban, we have 5 from the Marcos-backed party, and of course we have Bam Aquino and Kiko Pangilinan. The Senate lineup is very critical, especially with the impeachment trial of VP Sara set to start on July 30. How would you describe the new dynamics in the Senate, and what's your fearless forecast of the VP Sara impeachment?
I think it will be very difficult politically for the Senate to convict Sara Duterte. Having said that, let's start with first principles. The Senate will now constitute itself as an impeachment court, right? They will act as senator judges. They need to review the evidence against Sara Duterte, some of which we've already seen during the congressional inquiries and the inquiries in the Senate. So it's up to the prosecutors to make a convincing case. It's up to the defense to contest.
Yeah.
And then it will be up to the senator judges to make an independent and impartial decision.
Prof, I just want to go on, expound on this further, because other commentators have also mentioned that it has now become a numbers game of who will support VP Sara and who would be against. And a lot of it's actually, they're trying to identify right now who are the quote-unquote soft votes that could be swayed one way or the other, depending on the weight of the evidence. Now, I know that we have identified some senators to be pro VP Sara Duterte and those who are more in favor of the impeachment. But we talk about the prosecution, we talk about the weight of the evidence. Do you feel that there are those soft voters out there, soft votes within the Senate, to be able to swing one way or the other, especially considering that if the weight of the evidence is a bit irrefutable, that it could shift one way or the other, or if there are holes in the argument, you could have those who will rather side with VP Sara?
Yeah. I mean, let's take the example of the impeachment trial of former President Joseph Estrada, right? Past a certain point, the evidence seemed to be very, convincing, overwhelming. It sparked people power too when the Senate summarily concluded the impeachment trial, right? So you can't fool all the people all the time, right? So if the prosecution really puts up such a strong case, these so-called soft votes can can recalculate, right? But as of today, I think the main implication of the outcome of the Senate races are political. You were already talking about how people, the body of the 2025 election isn't even cold yet. People are already thinking about 2028, and probably people are calculating the odds of a Sara Duterte presidency, right?
Yeah.
So tracking back to how this will play with the Senate impeachment, already you have five new incoming senators who have from almost prima facie uh, casting their support for Sara Duterte, uh, and Senator Robin Padilla, as well. And she only needs 9, or at least 8, right? At least 8. So it seems that a conviction just based on the outset, prior to the actual trial, prior to the case that both prosecution and defense will be making at the outset, it will be quite challenging, or it's not a foregone conclusion
Yeah.
that Sara Duterte will be convicted.
Now, Prof, I want to shift the conversation now. Let's talk about political dynasties and artistas that are running. As we saw, there was some major shakeups this midterm elections. So would you say, moving forward, the results of this election, would this discourage or encourage those outside political dynasties and those that are not artistas to run in the next election?
Yeah. So I think that this is nothing new, right? Uh, Political dynasties have become more and more entrenched. In the past, we were talking about fat and thin dynasties, right? Thin dynasties are the one where successive members of the family, win, especially like after the 3-term limit is over, a wife or a son or a daughter will take over temporarily, and so on. Fat dynasties are those that sabay-sabay, like many members of the family are running and winning and holding office, from the governor to the mayor to concejal to Congress, and so on. What we're seeing today is are obese dynasties, right? Like extremely family-based campaigning. You see, like in one poster, several members of the same family, and it's not even just for the legislative or local positions. This also includes the party list. The party list, which is supposed to be, I mean, despite the Supreme Court ruling that opened this up, but going by the Constitution, the party list is supposed to be a representation of basic sectors, issue driven political representation, and even that has been completely infiltrated by political dynasties. And then as for celebrities, I mean, yes, this is again, nothing new in Philippine politics. In the Senate races, we see that the results are a bit mixed. Senator Padilla was the number one senator in 2022, but we saw, for instance, Bong Revilla, despite his incumbency, dropping out of the Magic 12.
Yeah, we saw Senator Bong Revilla, Jimmy Bondoc, Philip Salvador, Willie Revillame all underperform in this particular election cycle. And of course, we also saw the fall of certain dynasties. Former Representative Cynthia Villar also losing in her
Yes.
race as well. And I think we are seeing some shifts, not necessarily, I believe, to say that it is a sign of the end times of political dynasties. I think it's way
Not
too
at all.
early. Not at all, but there have been some of the outliers there. But yeah, interesting
Yeah, those
conversation so far.
outliers, Yeah, those outliers, this is also nothing new, right?
Yeah.
There have been over the course of the every election cycle, there are some dynasties, of course, that do get
Yes.
dislodged. But the overall trend is not against the sort of dominance of political dynasties in the country.
I wanted to ask Prof. Sol, we're seeing weak performance from the artistas, the celebrities, and some political dynasties. Do you feel that this is the voice, Gen Zs and millennials being the majority of the registered voters this midterm elections? Do you feel that this is the voice of the youth wanting to be heard? And also, do you feel that voters this time have more discernment?
I will reserve some judgment on that. Of course, that is the hope, right? That is the hope. But like I said, it overall is still to me unsurprising, and I don't really want to lose sight of the fact that the overall trend is despite a few upsets, the overall trend hasn't really changed.
Thank you very much. Such an interesting conversation with you today. UP Political Science Assistant Professor Sol Iglesias. Thank you, Prof, for joining us this morning.
Thank you so much for having me.